Okay, so just a brief overview of Capital Power. We are a builder, owner, and operator of power generation, and that is throughout Canada and the United States. We have over 26 facilities throughout the two countries. We operate renewables and thermal generation, so that includes primarily renewables are primarily wind. We have natural gas generation, and then we also have our legacy coal plants here in Alberta. We have about 6,000 megawatts of generation. Just in terms of what that actually means for someone that's not familiar with the power industry, that might be about half. If we were to put all of that generation into Alberta, that might be about half of the generation at any one time within Alberta.
Sorry to be rude, but I've got my headphones in. I'm just listening to.
Sorry, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, carry on, James.
Okay. Now, just in terms of about 10-minute overview here, I'm going to talk about some more of the mechanics of the compliance side. And, you know, if I'm sort of contrasting this with Denise's presentation of, you know, I'm talking about the compliance side and she was talking more to the voluntary piece. I see that the voluntary side is you're almost designing a system and sort of creating it and moving it through it for sustainability reasons, as opposed to a compliance environment is more of a known environment. You have an existing regulation of which you're operating in. And so it's a bit more defined in terms of how a buyer might approach that piece. So I'm just going to talk about what a compliance buyer is, how we view the market, and then I'm going to talk briefly on the mechanics of sort of contracts here. Before I get into it, my view of, you know, if you're looking at developing a protocol or thinking, why would you want to be, you know, why would you want to look at a protocol that works for a compliance market? You know, the key sort of view or takeaway would be it tends that compliance markets have higher values for the emission credits for the offsets. So while it might be more rigorous to get a protocol accepted, and if you could think about that in a Canadian context, that might be getting a protocol accepted by the provincial or the federal government, there's probably likely higher value in that for those protocols that ultimately do get accepted. So again, just for a really high 10,000 foot level, what is a compliance buyer? What are we talking about when we say that? What we have here is a picture of Alberta Environment Minister Nixon last fall introducing the TIER regulation, and that is the Technology Innovation and Emissions Reduction Regulation, and that regulates large emitters in the province of Alberta. This isn't the first regulation, of course, of that sort. We've had regulation in Alberta, as has been touched on by Katie, since 2007. We've had several iterations, but essentially the primary components are similar. For any large emitters, which we define as greater than 100,000 tons in Alberta's context, those emitters must abide by that regulation, and those emitters will have a compliance obligation. And that compliance obligation is determined typically by taking either a facility, so for example, like an industrial facility, a baseline to emissions of that facility, or an industry standard baseline, and to the extent that entities' emissions are above or below that standard, they can either have a compliance obligation that they must pay into, or they have potentially the ability to actually create credits within that system. So my example of that for electricity company, here in Alberta, we have the best gas standard, which is actually a baseline for the entire electricity industry. And if I was just to give an example from the three types of generation that we have in Alberta, we have wind, natural gas, and coal generation. The best gas standard for gas is essentially designed sort of around a combined cycle unit, which might be like our Shepard power facility. So when that unit generates, it emits about 0.37 tons per megawatt hour. We don't actually have a compliance obligation if it's sort of running as intended.